Adam Smith was a key figure in the Scottish Enlightenment, along with David Hume. He was a philosopher who wrote a theory of the moral sentiments, as well as the founder of economics. His inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations started the discipline of economics, and it remains an important text in economics, partly because it has such deep insight into human nature, as well as into the nature of free exchanges. Why do people engage in business, and what's it good for? To answer that question, we have to go back to Adam Smith. Here's the core of Smith's argument. He says that if people pursue their self-interest, then we're going to get the best outcome for everyone. Now, at first glance, that looks like a kind of bold philosophical thesis, linking two rather different ideas. The ethical egoist is somebody who generally says that people should simply pursue their self-interest, that morality is equivalent to prudence, you should simply do what's best for you. On the other hand, a consequentialist usually is a universalist and says, I'm concerned with what's best not just for you, but for everyone. You should act to make the world a better place. And so I think the best actions are the actions that are going to do the most good for humanity in general, for everybody. Usually these two views are thought to be in conflict, but Smith's central point is that there is really no conflict between those two positions. If you tell people to pursue their own good and act prudentially for their own sakes, the result of that will be the best outcome for everybody. So one way of looking at it is to say that a general consequentialist attitude is one that justifies egoism as a kind of rule of thumb. Ordinarily, you can just pursue your own self-interest. You don't have to worry about conflicts with the common good, because the result of your pursuing your self-interest will be the common good. So don't feel as if there's a tension between your seeking your own good and seeking to make the world a better place. By seeking your own good, you are making the world a better place. In fact, you're doing it more effectively than doing anything else. Here is how he puts it in a famous passage. But man has almost constant occasion for the help of his brethren, and it is in vain for him to expect it from their benevolence only. He will be more likely to prevail if he can interest their self-love in his favor, and show them that it is for their own advantage to do for him what he requires of them. Whoever offers to another a bargain of any kind proposes to do this. Give me that which I want, and you shall have that which you want, is the meaning of every such offer. And it's in this manner that we obtain from one another the far greater part of those good offices which we stand in need of. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. That's the most famous part of the passage. It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. The butcher, the brewer, the baker, they are all doing things in order to make money. They open the bakery or the butcher shop or the brewery because they want to make a living. But you want to be able to enjoy the bread, the beer, the meat that comes from those shops. And so you're pursuing your own self-interest in buying those things. They are pursuing their own self-interest in producing them. The result, you're all much better off than if you weren't engaged in those exchanges. I think there's an argument in that passage and in other passages in Adam Smith that has the following structure. It has two premises and a conclusion. So the first premise we might call the premise of getting value. If each person pursues their own self-interest, they're going to try to do as well as possible. Now, we have to qualify this. Not everybody seeks to do as well as possible, to bake as much bread as possible, or as high quality bread as possible, to sell it for as much as they possibly can all the time. We each are trying to do as well as we can. Now, at some point, you stop working. At some point, you decide, well, that's enough. I've had it for the day. So we shouldn't take this maximizing idea too seriously. But still, his point is this. If I'm going to pursue my own self-interest, I'm going to try to do as well as possible. And so I'm going to try to produce as much bread or as much beer or as much meat of as high quality as I can, because I want to do as well as I can. Doesn't mean I'm going to work 24/7, but it does mean that up to whatever limit I set for myself, I'm going to be trying to be as productive as I can. But that brings me to the second premise. We might call that the premise of producing value. How is it that I do as well as possible? By producing things for other people. If I'm the baker, my goal is to produce bread that other people will want. If I'm the brewer, I want to produce beer that other people will want. In order to do that effectively, I better do it better than the competition. We're each trying to do as well as possible. So the second premise, producing value, is this. We do that in a free market by contributing as much as possible to the community. We have to provide a good or a service that is going to improve the lives of other people. So if I am the brewer, for example, brewing beer, how do I do as well for myself as possible? I've got to produce beer of as high a quality as I can to beat out the competition and sell it for a lower price than the competition in order for people to desire my beer. I've got to be contributing as much to the welfare, to the good of the community as I can in order to have people buy my product and do as well as I can. And the same is true if I'm baking bread. The same is true if I'm butchering meat. The same is going to be true if I'm sewing clothes or giving philosophy lectures or whatever it is. I've got to do this as well as I can, ideally better than my competitors can, and in that way contribute as much as I can to the good of the community in order for me to gain back what I gain by other people buying my bread, drinking my beer, and so on. And so how do I do well in this kind of free enterprise system? I do well by contributing to the good of the community, by giving other people what they want or need. I provide a good that they desire. I provide a service that they desire. I, in general, am contributing to their good. That's why they exchange things for my good or my service. What's the conclusion then? If each person pursues their own self-interest, they're going to be trying to contribute as much as possible to the good of the community. If they pursue their self-interest, they're trying to do good for themselves. They do good for themselves in such a system by doing good for others. So they're going to be trying to do as much for others as they can in order to do as well for themselves as they can. So pursuit of self-interest leads to benefits for the entire community. Here's how Smith expresses the argument. Every individual is continually exerting himself to find out the most advantageous employment for whatever capital he can command. It is his own advantage indeed, and not that of the society, which he has in view. But the study of his own advantage naturally, or rather necessarily, leads him to prefer that employment which is most advantageous to the society. Now, just as people do with their own labor, seeking their own self-interest, they try to produce as much as possible that other people will find useful and pay them for, and so try to contribute as much as they can to the good of the community, to the good of other people. So the same is true of those who control capital. If I actually am in the position of having funds to invest, then I'm going to, in order to gain the most profit for myself, try to invest them in the activities that are going to produce the most good for the community. Why am I going to do that? Precisely because those are the ones that people are going to pay the most for. And so by trying to invest my capital as wisely as possible from a prudential point of view so that I gain the most return, I am investing in the activities that are going to produce as much good for other people. That's why those other people are going to pay that much for the goods or services that are the result of that investment. So we get an analogous argument, the premise of getting value. Smith puts it this way: every individual who employs his capital in the support of domestic industry necessarily endeavors so to direct that industry that its produce may be of the greatest possible value. If I am investing in some company, I want it to get the best value for its products. I want it to thrive. I want it to succeed. But now the second premise, producing value. How does that company succeed? It does it by producing value for other people. The produce of industry is what it adds to the subject or materials upon which it's employed. In proportion as the value of this produce is great or small, so will likewise be the profits of the employer. But it is only for the sake of profit that any man employs a capital in the support of industry, and he will always therefore endeavor to employ it in the support of that industry of which the produce is likely to be of the greatest value, or to exchange for the greatest quantity either of money or of other goods. But the annual revenue of every society is always precisely equal to the exchangeable value of the whole annual produce of its industry, or rather is precisely the same thing with that exchangeable value. As every individual therefore endeavors as much as he can, both to employ his capital in the support of domestic industry and so to direct that industry that its produce may be of the greatest value, every individual necessarily labors to render the annual revenue of the society as great as he can. So that leads us to the conclusion. Self-interest maximizes benefits to the entire community. It does it through my individual effort. It does it through my investing of my capital in those industries that are going to produce the most exchangeable value. And what does it mean to produce the most exchangeable value? To produce the most value for the community, to contribute as much as possible to the common good of the community. The result of that is that if each pursues their own self-interest, whether it's in laboring or investing capital, the result of that is going to be the benefit of the entire community. In fact, if I maximize my own returns either way, through labor or through investment, I am going to contribute to maximizing the value of the entire community. I'm going to maximize the good of the entire community. Now, in doing this, of course, I may not be thinking about corporate social responsibility. I may not be thinking about the good of the community at all. I may be just looking to get the best return I can for my labor or for my investment. But Smith said it doesn't matter what I intend. The result is going to be that the community is benefited as much as possible. The way that Smith, at one crucial point, puts the argument from self-interest to producing value to, in that way, contributing to the good of the community, is in his passage where he talks about the invisible hand. The idea is that we don't have to intend the good of the community at all. Each is intending only personal benefit. Each person labors so that their labor will bring about the best return to them. They invest their capital in such a way that it promotes the best return for them. But through investing or through working in that way, they are trying to get the best return by producing things that other people will exchange value for. And so they are going to maximize returns to themselves by maximizing what they produce for other people. In that way, everybody, even though they're acting out of their own self-interest, acts to promote the best outcome for the entire community. They are led in that way, Smith says, as if by an invisible hand to promote the good of the entire community. Each person, when he does all of this, intends only his own gain, and he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. Nor is it always the worse for the society that it was no part of. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. We'll get to that part of the argument later, where he says, look, not only is this going to promote the good of the society, to the extent that you decide to put aside your own self-interest and directly try to promote the good of society, you're likely to be messing it up. Now, there might be circumstances, and we'll talk about those, in which actually the outcome is not going to be the best for the society. But typically it is, he says. And odds are that if you try to depart from that, the very conditions that are going to make it difficult to achieve the good of the whole community will affect you just as much or maybe even more.